Hey Lake Point, Pastor Micah here to get you caught up on Sunday's message. Pastor Nate kicked things off by talking about temples. Now, in modern times, we tend to think of temples as merely religious buildings where people gather to worship, but in ancient times, the temple was central to a people group's culture. In ancient time, temples were considered the home, the dwelling place of the deities, the local gods, that they worshipped. And not just the home, but more importantly, the headquarters, the control room of whichever gods had control or jurisdiction over that area. Furthermore, these deities were not visible to creation, and so humans would make idols out of wood or stone and place them in the temples to represent their rule. Whatever pagan god you worship controlled the life systems of your tribe and culture. They controlled your fertility, your ability to conceive and have a child. They controlled the growing of crops, weather patterns, or protection from natural disasters, and they even controlled your success in battle. Now, it's important to note that ancient civilizations understood the gods to be distant, detached, demanding, and constantly needing to be appeased. And so it was the responsibility of humans to do everything they could to satisfy the needs of the gods. This required vast amounts of sacrifices and lots of priests who worked around the clock to appease them, because the gods could easily become exhausted and thus neglectful of their role in sustaining the life systems of the universe. Sometimes desperate for children or flourishing crops, worshippers would perform sexual acts to remind the gods of their role in providing the power of fertility in the universe. The idea behind this was that when the life systems of the world seemed to be faltering, the priests and the worshippers could persuade the gods into performing their responsibilities. At the worst of times, worshippers would descend into a bloodbath of human sacrifice in an attempt to manipulate the life systems of the universe. Now, fast forward to Moses and the Hebrew people 3,500 years ago, and keep in mind, this is the cultural context that they find themselves in when Yahweh shows up and delivers them from Egypt and establishes them as his own people in the land of Israel. God had to completely transform their understanding of temples and life systems and how he, the one true God, actually operated. And so through Moses, he takes them back to the creation story and explains how all of creation was originally meant to be his temple. Think about it this way: planet Earth as one big cosmic temple. And it was specifically in the Garden of Eden that God made his home and his headquarters, from which his presence would give life to all of creation. This is what we read in Genesis chapter 1 and 2. In those first two chapters, we discover 5 unique things that characterize this first ever temple. In Genesis 1, the first thing we see is the presence of God. We see that while the Holy Spirit hovered over the unformed chaos of the world did not yet become God's temple until the 7th day of creation, when it was made complete and God's presence came to dwell there. We read of how God's presence caused all the life systems of creation not just to function but to flourish. God's presence is central to making creation his temple. Which leads us to the second unique characteristic of the very first temple. It's that the overlap of heaven and earth. The temple was the place where heaven and earth came together. The place where the divine realm, heaven, and the human realm, earth, overlapped. It's why in ancient times temples were often on the top of mountains, because it symbolizes this union. The third thing we see about this very first temple is the greatness of God, rest and rule. We read in Genesis that on the 7th day of creation, God entered his temple to rest. The chaos of bringing order to the world was now conquered, and God was ready to enjoy his temple. There was nothing left for him to do. Unlike the pagan temples, which contained multiple gods with limited dominion over specific regions or as aspects of creation, Yahweh demonstrated that he was the one true God who rules over all creation. Which leads us to the pinnacle of his creation, humans. Humans played a very different role in the first temple. They were image bearers rather than idols. In ancient pagan temples, humans created idols to represent the image of their deities. But in the very first temple, God creates humans to be his image bearers. He gives them these priestly roles as his agents in the world, and we're to care for his temple. And as his image bearers, bring his rest, his shalom, and rule his kingdom to all parts of the globe. Which leads us to the final point that characterized the very first temple, and a point that we often miss. It's that God's intention is for the temple to expand. When Adam and Eve were commanded by God to be fruitful and multiply, they were to go beyond Eden and fill the earth and subdue it. Just as God subdued and brought order out of chaos, humans were to do the same. They were to go beyond Eden, spreading the garden to the whole planet by making all of it inhabitable. Adam and Eve were to widen the boundaries of the garden and make the whole world God's garden sanctuary. This outward expansion would include the goal of spreading God's life-giving presence to every square inch of this planet. Other temples did not have the capacity to grow. Instead, they were merely structures that housed idols. Yet a defining characteristic of the very first temple was its purpose to expand outward until all of heaven and earth were one mammoth temple in which God dwelled. That was, of course, until a sneaky serpent got in the way. He convinced Adam and Eve that what they really needed and wanted was freedom from God. But in choosing autonomy apart from God, Adam and Eve rejected their priestly role in the world. God, however, didn't give up on his plan to fill the earth with his presence. Despite their rebellion, God would not abandon his children. He would continue to seek them out. However, they could not enjoy his presence like they once did, as their unclean state from their fallenness would result in their death. And so to protect them from God's presence, it would need to be mediated. And so we see that all throughout the Old Testament, God's presence is mediated through fire and clouds and sacrifices and temples and curtains and purity codes. The Israelites would enjoy a relationship with him, but it had to be mediated through these means, aka religion. They could not experience the fullness of his presence as the relationship with him remained fractured. Which leads us to the New Testament and the story of Jesus. Everything in his Jewish culture centered around the temple in Jerusalem. It was the place where they believed heaven touched earth, the place where God mediated his presence, the place where their sins was atoned for and made them God's holy people. It was also a corrupt place, a place where those in authority were more concerned about maintaining their position of power rather than empowering the people they were called to serve. And so during one of his visits, Jesus drives the sellers out of the temple, which was not just a critique of the Jerusalem temple, but all temples, all life systems that have human pride rather than God's presence at their core. Furthermore, Jesus spoke of the temple being torn down and raised back up in 3 days. This was preposterous to the Jewish leaders. More than that, they considered it blasphemy. It would eventually be the thing that got Jesus killed. But what they didn't realize is that Jesus wasn't talking about their temple, he was talking about himself. What they failed to see was that Jesus had become the new temple, the place where God's presence dwelled, the place where heaven touched earth, the place where God rested and ruled. Even more, Jesus made it possible for us to now fully experience God's presence. It is why when Jesus died, the curtain in the temple, the mediating veil which protected unclean humans from the glory of God's presence was torn in two. With the final sacrifice now fulfilled upon the cross, God himself removed the barrier that he had placed at the gates of Eden. Now, following his resurrection, Jesus ascends to the right hand of God the Father in heaven. And as Nate shared, by ascending, Jesus appears to leave. But he had taught his disciples that he had to go for the Spirit to come, because that was the plan. The church, empowered by the Spirit, would take his presence across the world. I mean, think back to that very first temple and Adam and Eve's responsibility. They were to partner with God in spreading his presence. Jesus, as the new Adam, achieved what the first Adam could not. And after his resurrection, Jesus instructs his disciples to spread his presence throughout all of creation. And they will accomplish this through the power of the Holy Spirit, God's empowering presence. What we see in Acts chapter 2 is that the people of God will become a living temple filled with his Holy Spirit, each of them a mini temple who through living in his presence will spread his presence throughout the world, which is pretty cool. My friends, you, filled with the Holy Spirit, are meant to act as God's renewing agent in the world. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. Enjoy jumping into discussion questions. I'll see you next time.